Hi everyone, this is Professor Warren, and today we're going to talk about arguments, understanding them, being able to realize what components are made up of in an argument, and we're going to debunk some, rumors or some misconceptions about what arguments are. So, before I even go any further, let's talk about what is an argument and why in an English course I need to know what an argument is. So let's start from there. What's an argument? Why do we need to know? So, according to the textbook, an argument, right, is anything that is a text that's written, spoken, oral, or visual that expresses a point of view, right? It's nothing that is hostile, it's nothing that is, even though it can be hostile, it's nothing that's bad. An argument is literally any text that's written, spoken, oral, or visual. Right, that expresses a point of view. And there are many people that argue that all language is inherently persuasive. So what do I mean by that? Essentially what they are arguing is that everything that we say is persuasive in some way, shape, or form. Right now, me giving you this lecture is an argument, right? I'm expressing to you, hey, you should listen to me, I'm a professor, I have multiple degrees back there in English language and literature, right? So I am essentially arguing to you, hey, listen to me, this is what an argument is, right? Now, is everything we say an argument? I would argue yes, to an extent, right? So I have a student that one time said, well, Professor Warren, what about this example? And the example that they gave me is this. They said, what if I was walking down the street and there was a guy who was digging in the trash and I said, you do you. Now, is that an argument? It actually is, right? Because even though that person didn't say, hi, person digging in the trash, I agree with what you're doing, they essentially are agreeing, right? They are providing an argument to that person. They say, hey, you do you, is essentially them saying, continue doing that, right? They're sort of arguing their position on that, which is, that person can continue doing this trash digging if they want to, right? And that would also go for anybody who just walked past and didn't say anything at all, right? That is sort of a visual clue, or visual argument to that person to say, hey, whatever I'm doing, nobody's stopping me, so hey, I must be allowed to dig in the trash, right? So, everything that we say and do and create and express, because humans are a community-based species, it's all argument, right? We're all communicating and expressing things to one another. So, everything that we say and do is an argument. I have this example here, right, of a visual argument. This is from Banksy. Banksy is a graffiti artist, and if you know anything about graffiti, right, graffiti is often an art medium that is considered sort of a art of the people, if you will. So, what does that mean? Well, graffiti, right, is, whether tagging or making, elaborate art pieces, right, you're taking an art medium and you're putting it somewhere where it's not supposed to be, right, whether it's the side of a building or, under a railroad track or what have you, right? And so, what graffiti really is, right, is this sort of expressive way that people get their points across. They do things, they're using art in a way that sort of challenges the system, right? And so a lot of graffiti artists argue that, hey, right, graffiti shouldn't be sold or exhibited in museums, right, because the people who frequent museums are not everyday people who experience the things that we're talking about through our art, right? So, that's why, right, graffiti artists don't usually sell their art or put them, right, for sale in a museum. So this piece of art, right, Banksy is a very famous graffiti artist, and so he put his piece in a auction, right? And what happened was, when the auctioneer said sold, to blah blah blah, there was a built-in shredder in that gold-plated frame, and it started shredding the piece of work. And unfortunately, the shredder inside the frame broke halfway through, so it's now left like this. And what happened was the people who were going to buy it still didn't get it, right? They didn't get his visual argument. and then it resold for an even higher price than it originally sold for. So, this is just an example of sort of a visual argument, right? We know from other graffiti artists that graffiti is something that's meant for everyday people to admire, it's meant for them to express themselves, and so Banksy, right, challenged that. He put his piece in a museum and then purposefully shredded it. Even though it failed, right, people still didn't get the argument. Now, before we continue, right, so we just discussed what is an argument, right? It's expressing a point of view, visually, written, or spoken, right? One thing that we need to be aware of when it comes to arguments is that all arguments are utilizing this thing called rhetoric. And rhetoric is the art of persuasion. So think about this, right? How many times have you tried to persuade someone and it didn't work? Or it did work, right? Was it hard to do both? I would argue, yeah. It's hard to convince somebody, right, to believe you. And it's hard to then, get somebody who doesn't believe you to try to believe you, right? Or at least be convinced by you. So, anytime I say rhetoric, just remember, it's the art of persuading people. And that's why as English writers and professionals, and in any English course, we teach rhetoric. Because it is an art. It's something you've got to learn. Even though we are all have grown up learning language, using language, it's still something you have to practice and you have to understand how to use it. Now, again, we've already sort of covered this, right? But I wanted to just preface this one more time. When I say, argument, right, I don't mean anything hostile. I'm just simply saying, hey, right, this is the way in which we're expressing our thoughts, our opinions, our educated opinions, and sort of our points of view. Now, one other thing that we need to make sure we hit on is that are arguments always made or aimed at winning? Are they? No. Now, if you're in debate club, are you probably aimed at winning the debate? Obviously, yeah. But if you are, say for instance, trying to convince your significant other, where do you want to go to eat tonight? Are you necessarily trying to win? Not really, right? You're just trying to say, hey, right, I just want us to come to a consensus on where we should eat, because either way is good for me, right? We're going to go get food. So, arguments aren't always aimed at winning. If you approach arguments as hostile and that there's got to be a winner and a loser, you're not really going to have a good time arguing. You're not really arguing effectively, which we'll go over here in a little bit more in depth. But just be aware, right? We're not sort of aiming at winning, and we're not trying to be mean about it. So, some other things we have to cover. Why am I requiring you to read an argument critically? Why am I asking you to think critically about arguments? And there's two main reasons why not only am I requiring it, but a lot of other English professors require it. The first one is to get your ideas off effectively and persuasively. Again, if all language is persuasive in some way, shape, or form, then you've got to be able to effectively be able to do that, to get those ideas off persuasively. So that's why you have to not only look at your own arguments critically, but look at other people's arguments critically too, and see what they do well and what they may not do so well at, and then learn from their mistakes or their triumphs, and apply that to your own use of language. The next reason is it protects you from being manipulated by others. We live not only in just a digital age, but an age of much mis- or disinformation. And so, if you can't think critically about arguments the way other people use them, and the way you yourself use them, then you're going to be manipulated by people who have a better grasp of it. So, if you don't think for yourself, somebody else is going to think for you. So, these are our two reasons. You need to be able to effectively get your ideas across because it's an important life skill. And number two, it protects you from being manipulated by people who would want to trick you or harm you with their use of rhetoric. So, here's sort of my ways to practice that self-defense, right? The sort of verbal self-defense. Here's some of my tips and tricks. The first one is pay attention. As I would say, tempting as it is sometimes to skim something, right, when you don't want to read like 30, 40 pages of words, don't skim. If you do that, number one, if you miss something, somebody's going to call you out for it, right? I did this with debating before, where people didn't fully listen to my argument, and that was the first thing I pulled out. I was like, well, you don't understand my argument, first off, because you didn't address this, you didn't address that, etc., etc., right? So first off, you're going to get called out. Second, if you skim, you're going to miss important parts, right, that you need to be aware of before delving further into it. So again, first off that thing, pay attention, avoid skimming. The second one is keep an eye out for clickbait, especially since we live in the digital age, right? Keep an eye out for clickbait. Are we all aware of what clickbait is? Are we? Okay. Let me just very quickly go over what clickbait is. So, clickbait is things that are meant to attract your attention because they want your attention. So think of any BuzzFeed article that said, 10 amazing facts about sea sponges, and it's got like an image of like the open ocean, and it's got like a red circle, and you look inside the red circle, you don't see anything. So you click on the article because you want to know, right? You didn't see anything in that image, you want to know what was in that image, right? You want to know what was in that image, or what those 10 amazing facts are, even if you didn't really care beforehand. We see this on YouTube, you see this on TikTok, you see this on any social media platform, right? There are articles or videos that are misleading, or they're just simply utilizing language such as amazing, wonderful, crazy, and they use images that are over the top and exaggerated or nonsensical, because they want you to click on them, right? Because clicking on them gives them money, and money is what we're all after, right? So, keep an eye out for clickbait. If it's got clickbait in it, that should be a red flag. Hey, it wants my attention. So then think critically. Why does it want my attention? Does it want money? Does it want to misinform me? Does it want me to side on this issue? What have you? That sort of goes into be skeptical. Again, always be skeptical. Don't just go for, your best friend's argument because they're your best friend. Always be skeptical, listen to what they're saying, always have sort of a stance of openness. Look for unstated assumptions behind claims and question them. So, politicians like to do this a lot, where they may give a fact or statistic, and they want you to just not question it. So, say a politician said, hey, we should ban ice cream because 92% of deaths during the summer in the United States are caused by ice cream. What they want you to do is hear that information and not question where it came from. So if you ever hear someone give like a statistic or a fact, even if it seems plausible, always ask them, well, where did you get it? Right? Where did you get it? Who'd you get it from? Don't just assume that they did their due diligence and ignore it. Always question those claims or those unstated assumptions and challenge them. And that goes kind of into this next one, right? If you are, say for instance, taking that ice cream statistic, right? Now you need to see if it's a real fact, if it's a fact that may be exaggerated, or if it's completely taken out of context. So, now that you're sort of being skeptical, you're not just assuming that that person, those claims are true, you're questioning them. Now you need to go and see, okay, they said they got it here. Let me read through the article, don't skim it. Oh, wait, they pulled out this tiny quote, and the whole article was about how ice cream is safe. And the quote they pulled out was somebody debunking that claim, right? So, always, right, be able to look at facts, statistics, reasoning, and say, okay, what has verifiable support, what may be good, but it's a little over-exaggerated, and what may be completely incorrect. And this goes into my last one, learn to triangulate. Never get your information from one source. Always get it from multiple sources. Kind of like a triangle, right, that has 3 points. Get them from varying degrees, and then figure out what is the truth. I personally do this in my daily life, where I look at a news source from a very liberal or left-wing source. I get some information from a right-wing news source, and then I get one from an outside source from outside the US. And this helps me to determine what is the truth in all of this information that I'm getting. My last sort of, I would say, argumentative self-defense techniques is always to listen. You should always listen, or take this, what I have called a stance of openness, every time that you listen to an argument. You should never go into an argument thinking you're going to automatically agree with that person or automatically disagree, because you may be wrong. So always go into it with an open mind. Again, doesn't mean that you have to necessarily, if you know somebody you're going to listen to is pretty out there, like an Alex Jones figure, at least listen to what they have to say, and then you can sort of debunk those claims and use some critical thinking. If you don't do that, and you're somebody who's prone to, when you hear an argument, you're going to say, I'm going to go ahead and agree with this person, I'm going to go ahead and disagree, then you find yourself in what's called an echo chamber. Now, as I always recommend, break words down in their parts. We've got echo, right? Echo was when you yell into a cave and you hear your own voice back at you. And the word chamber, right? An enclosed space. So, echo chamber. A good example of this is the internet, where TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, they're trying to keep us happy. And they do that by feeding us people and ideas that we already like. And so what an echo chamber is that you're only hearing and seeing not only what you say, but what other people who think very similarly to you are saying. Now, you probably can see an issue with that. If you're not listening or triangulating your information, looking actually for people who disagree with you and listening to what they have to say, and then maybe either debunking that or saying, that is a good point, then you'll find yourself in an echo chamber, and these can be very dangerous. You're not being open to other ideas, you're not hearing other ideas, and this is where we start getting things like radicalization, where people who, say for instance, didn't like LGBT people, they find themselves in an echo chamber, and then all it takes is one person to say, hey, let's do violence against them. And they try to make an argument, and since everybody already agrees and nobody disagrees, you get very negative outcomes, to put it lightly. So, always try to not only recognize if you're in an echo chamber, but openly look for people and be open to their arguments. So, let's continue. Let's go into types of arguments and see how people actually make some arguments, because that's the whole point. Now that we know what arguments are and how to protect ourselves from bad arguments. So, as I said, all arguments are, trying to persuade you. All language is persuasive. And so, whether they're utilizing hope, envy, pride, facts, statistics, or even your own credibility, they are trying to persuade you. These 4 things I have right here, ethos, pathos, logos, and kairos. These are all what are called rhetorical appeals, right? We already talked about what rhetoric is. Rhetoric is the art of persuasion. These 4 things are how you do that persuasion. These are sort of the tools you use in order to effectively persuade someone. The first one is ethos, or ethics. It's when you use either your credibility or someone else's credibility to bolster your argument. So, if a doctor who is a professional dietitian, if they are making an argument about you having to change your diet, they likely are going to use that credibility. They're going to say, I went to school for however many years, I have a degree as a dietitian, etc., etc. So, that's one way that us humans do that. We utilize ethos. We utilize credibility. The next one is pathos, or passion. This is when you use emotion to convince people of your position. Children love this one, right? Have you ever been to or been around a child and they want something? They don't know how to really persuade you, but they know if I cry, if I beg, if I get angry, those emotions, mom or sister or brother, who have you, dad, they're gonna do what I want. Hopefully you're not very convinced by those, but they are impactful. If you see somebody crying, as a human, we are instinctually wanting to help or find out why that person is being emotional, and so people utilize pathos. The next one is logos, or logic. This is when you use facts, statistics, hard evidence, or just reason to convince somebody of your position. So, going back to the dietitian may not only be using their credibility, they may then start to pull out some hard evidence, right? Some statistics, some studies, some research to also convince you. And then lastly, we have kairos. Whether you're using ethos, pathos, or logos, you always have to consider kairos, the timeliness of your argument. It wouldn't make sense to, argue that everyone should eat ice cream at the eulogy of someone who died eating ice cream. So always consider the timeliness and the context in which you're utilizing ethos, pathos, logos. And this is why you probably have heard of this. It's called the rhetorical triangle. The rhetorical triangle is a way to visualize what you're doing when you're arguing. Whether you're using ethos, logos, or pathos, right, you're using one portion of the triangle. And depending on the type of argument you're making, you may, kind of like what I gave with the dietitian example, you may be using ethos, and you may be using logos. You may use one side of a triangle to make your argument. Or you can use ethos, logos, and pathos, right? Maybe the dietitian they start off their argument saying, hey, I'm a dietitian. I've been a dietitian for 6 years. And I know from research conducted by blah, 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 that too much sugar is bad for your health, yada, yada, yada. And then maybe they go into a passionate appeal where they say, I remember a 6-year-old boy who was 300 pounds and came into my office and they couldn't do anything because they were so overweight and blah, 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 right? So that's sort of the rhetorical triangle. It's a way to visualize what we're doing when we do ethos, pathos, logos. And this is also just to demonstrate that you don't have to just use one. Likely you're not. As humans, our argumentation, our language is so complex that we often utilize one, two, maybe all three. But regardless of which one you're using, kairos is in the center because you always have to consider the context and the timeliness of your argument. So, these ones are specific types of arguments. All of these are using either ethos, pathos, logos, or a combination of both, but these ones I've included are ones you're likely to see a lot of every single day, or at least very often during your week. The first one are arguments to convince and inform. It's very straightforward in its name. It's when you're making an argument where you are utilizing, reasonable-based information or evidence to give your position. Kind of like the dietitian argument, right? Where they are, utilizing maybe some research studies about the ill effects of sugar on your body. That would be an argument to convince and inform. They're utilizing reason and facts and statistics to convince you of their position. However, right, arguments to convince and inform don't just stop usually at trying to convince you or just inform you. They oftentimes want you to then take an action. So, maybe the dietitian just wants to convince and inform you. Or maybe they give you those facts and statistics, and then towards the end of their argument, they say, okay, now that you're armed with this information, I want you all to go into your pantry and throw out anything that's got, high sugar content, right? So, arguments to convince and inform, be aware, they're not just using facts and statistics just to convince you of their position or just to inform you. There are times, and quite a bit of times, where they then want you to take an action, do something out in the real world. Arguments to make decisions, pretty straightforward. Arguments to make decisions are things that you probably do every single day, whether it's personal or it's civil matters. If you wake up in the morning, right, your alarm goes off, you're making an argument to make a decision with yourself. You probably are listening to that alarm, and you're like, okay, I gotta get up now. That's an argument you're having with yourself, right? Get up. I hear my alarm. I gotta get up, gotta get to work. Or maybe, you don't go to work and you're like, you know what, screw it. I'll just lose my job. So you make these every day, whether you're deciding whether to eat, go to work, say hey to your coworker, what have you. But they can also be civil decisions, right? What should we do as a society? Legislation, city hall meetings, things like that. So these are arguments to make decisions. Arguments to understand and explore. These ones are a little bit more complex, but you do probably experience them quite a bit in your daily life. These are open-ended arguments where somebody presents their arguments, maybe using ethos, pathos, logos, a mixture of both, or all three of them. But they don't want to lead you to a conclusion. They want you to come up with your own conclusion based off what they've presented to you. These are also called invitational arguments, and you can kind of understand these like an invitation. If I send you an invitation to my birthday party, you either can, look at it and say, I'm not going. Or you can look at it and say, okay, maybe I'm going to go. Because likely on my invitation I've got where it's at, what time it's going to be, what we're going to be doing at the party. Those are all arguments. I'm trying to convince you to come to my birthday, and it's open-ended, right? You can either go to my birthday party, you can either not go to my birthday party, or maybe you do a mix of both, where you kind of go, where you maybe stop by, wave at me, leave, right? Or send a birthday card, say, oh, I can't make it, here's a card, right? So, those are kind of arguments to understand and explore. You might also see them, they're also called Rogerian arguments, and it's the same thing. It's, people come together, they bring forth their ideas, and then everybody leaves with their own conclusions based off what evidence was provided. If you want another sort of example, films and movies are arguments to understand and explore. Because if I watch a movie, and you are watching the same movie with me, we likely are going to have a very different interpretation of what that movie meant, right? Because movies are hidden and layered in metaphor and symbolism. So if you're watching a movie and I'm watching a movie, we're likely going to have different experiences and different conclusions as to what was that movie about? What lessons should we learn? Things like that. That's another way to remember what an argument to understand and explore is. Arguments about time. So, there are three different types of arguments about time. One's about the past, the future, and the present. So, arguments about the past. These are arguments that look at past events, and they go, okay, this happened in the past, so how did we get here? So they're trying to understand how we got to our present situation based off of evidence or testimonies or what have you that happened in the past, right? We good on that? Okay. Arguments about the future. This one's kind of the opposite. It's going, okay, what can we do now to impact the future? We do this quite a bit as a society, right? Especially when we talk about children. We go, okay, what should we do now for our future children or our children's children? So, arguments about the past, looking at the past in order to understand how we got here. Arguments about the future, looking at what we're doing now to better impact the future, for good or worse. Arguments about the present. So these ones are looking at the present, and they're trying to impact just the present. So these ones often are more concerned with challenging either widely held beliefs or just societal culture and norms. So this one is essentially saying, hey, right, we have this group of minorities being oppressed. What can we do now to help solve this issue now? Now you may be thinking, well, if you're trying to if you're trying to impact the present, isn't that also kind of impacting the future? And I would say there is often very blurred line between arguments about the future and arguments about the present, because they kind of almost work hand in hand. But the difference is, what is their focus, right? Arguments about the past, they're focused more on what the past did that impacts our future. Our present. Arguments about the future are more concerned with, hey, what can we do now to impact the future? The focus is on the future. The present, those ones are more focused on the present. So, if you're ever presented with an argument about time and there seems to be a little bit of, blurred lines between which one they are, likely it's because you kind of have to sometimes do that, right? It's hard to really argue for the present without involving the future or looking to the past, but just sort of look for where the focus is, and that could give you a good idea of what type of argument that is. And again, any of these could use ethos, pathos, and or logos to get their points across. So, some other arguments that exist are called arguments of definition, and these are essentially arguments where people are concerned with defining words and then placing those words or things into categories based on their definitions. And these are sometimes often the most heated arguments that exist. So let me give you an example of what arguments of definition are. So, low-carb diets are dangerous. So, what words in there are people going to argue the definition about? So, one of the ones you might be seeing is dangerous. That one, that's correct, right? So, people are going to argue that definition. What does dangerous mean, right? Are we talking about dangerous in terms of, oh, it's dangerous to walk home at night? Or are we talking about, extreme sports, doing paragliding off a cliff type of dangerous? So, that would be something that, within an argument of definition, somebody would call out, well, is it dangerous? What is dangerous, right? We gotta define that so then we can see if low-carb diets are dangerous. And one other word in there is also, would be a term that would need defining, which is low-carb, right? Because low-carb is, are we talking about 2 carbs, 10 carbs, there's no consensus on what a low-carb diet is, so that would be sort of an argument of definition, where people would then try to place those within particular categories and then argue them based on their definitions. Another one is, my boss is a jerk. Again, which word in there is the word that's going to be argued about? Jerk. Yeah. Is your boss a jerk because they say mean things to you? Is your boss a jerk because they make you do your job? Or is your boss a jerk because they walk by and, knock all your stuff off your desk, right? What is the jerk? That would have to be the thing to be defined. And like I said, these are often very heated debates, they're very contested debates, and when we talk about fallacious arguments or bad arguments, this can also be a way in which people make bad arguments, this sort of defining things or lack of defining things, which we'll talk about in a future lecture. So, arguments of evaluation. Here is where we're sort of treading the line between sort of philosophy and argumentation. So I'm not going to go too far into this, I'm just going to sort of skim it. But basically, arguments of evaluation is, you're concerned whether something is good, bad, ineffective, effective, harmful, helpful, and you're going to argue based on that. So, for instance, if you are trying to see if we should eat ice cream every Saturday. I keep using ice cream, but I'm trying to avoid some very touchy subjects, so let's just do ice cream, right? You're trying to argue that we should have ice cream every Saturday. There are good things about ice cream and there are bad things about ice cream, but maybe you're making the argument that it's a good thing because there are more good things about ice cream than bad things about ice cream. So you would say, oh, well, we should eat ice cream on Saturday because it tastes good, it makes people happy, there are so many different flavors, it will support all the ice cream businesses in the area, versus, you could get a cavity, right? There's more to that, but, being a little, playing it under a little bit there. So, that's essentially what arguments of evaluation are, right? They say, hey, we should either do this thing because it's very helpful, therefore we should do it, or we should not do this thing because it's very harmful, and here's all these reasons why it's harmful. These are also fall into the categories of inductive and deductive reasoning. Again, this is where we start to hit the philosophy thing, so we're not going to go too deep into this, but essentially, arguments of evaluation, you're arguing either for or against something based on either how good that thing is, how bad that thing is, how effective, how ineffective, how harmful, how helpful it is. One other thing that you gotta do, whether you're using ethos, pathos, logos, and or kairos, always kairos, but, the other ones, maybe you're using a mixture of 1, 2, 3 of them. Whatever it is you're doing, you always have to consider your intended audience. So, whenever you're making an argument, you always have an audience sort of pictured in your mind. Who is it that you're trying to appeal to? Who are you trying to convince? What types of people? You need to consider, when you are visualizing your audience, you need to understand their economic context, their social, their cultural, their linguistic, their geographic, their expertise, and their institutional sort of context. So, if you were, for instance, trying to convince people of climate change, and it's just, maybe your average everyday citizen, are you going to use terminology that they're not going to know? Obviously not, unless you go, okay, I gotta mention this particular term, right? Maybe I gotta mention, I'm trying to think of words. Again, not my expertise, I'm not a scientist, but maybe you gotta, mention words like, glacier melting, right? Maybe people understand that glacier melting exists, but maybe they don't really understand what it is. You're not just going to say, one reason we have to worry about climate change is glacier melting, and then you keep on going. You need to understand that, hey, right, if I was just giving this to average everyday people in the street, they're not going to have the same educational experience as me. They're not going to have the same, maybe, linguistic experience. They may not be able to understand some of these words, what they mean. So you always have to consider what your audience knows and what they don't know based on each of these contexts, right? This is an example that I have here on the screen from Dove. Dove, their intended audience is sort of empowering women. That's kind of their intended audience, right? Very empowered women. And they often do things where they show women of various body sizes, ethnicities, races, cultural, social backgrounds, and they try to appeal to them, right, under this sort of banner of female empowerment. One of their ads was this was a couple years ago, you can see they were 2017, but I remember this one, so I brought it up. They had an advertisement where a black woman lifts up her shirt, and there's a white woman underneath. Now, I do think after the white woman, I think she lifts off her shirt, and it's a Hispanic woman, but it's still in very poor taste. Especially because what a lot of people pointed out was that sort of, a black woman lifting off her shirt to be revealed as a white woman very much hinted at those old racist soap ads where they were like, oh, it's so clean it can clean your skin, so they implying that black people were dirty, right? Which is, incredibly racist, and people got that vibe from that advertisement. Now, do I think Dove meant that? Obviously, I don't think so. But that's why you always have to be aware of your intended audience. These are very empowered women, right? That like Dove products, or at least that's the audience they're trying to gravitate towards. And so those women are probably educated in issues of, discrimination, social diversity, social justice, and they may pick up on that more than maybe some other type of group of people, right? So, always make sure that you think about your audience. After you've constructed your argument, think about who you're trying to tailor your argument towards, and then see if there needs to be things in your argument that need to be tweaked so you don't end up with something like this. So always take into consider your audience. So, after all of this, I'll have some videos in this lecture that I want you to sort of analyze. It'll be on your discussion board. I'll tell you which ones I want you to analyze, and I'll have some questions for you. But let's very quickly do this one together. This is, let's go back. This is an ad that utilizes pathos. So right here, we see every hour, I wish this would not do that, that's annoying. Every hour, an animal is beaten or abused. Now, because all arguments use a combination of ethos, pathos, and logos, right, we can look at this language. Already, it's giving off sort of feelings, emotion. We got words like beaten, abused. Those are very powerful words. And so, immediately, it's going to evoke emotion. As well as, listen to the music. We got this sad music. We got words like suffer, alone, terrified. We got sad puppies and kitties. Oh, and they're behind bars. Oh. Limping puppies. Is there nothing this advertisement won't do to make you feel bad? Oh, look at that cat.
I'm Sarah McLaughlin. Please say you'll be the answer for an innocent animal who's suffering right now. An animal who needs your help. Please, call the number on your screen, or go online and join the BCSPCA with a monthly gift, right now. For just $18 a month, you'll rest...
Okay, so I'm going to stop it there, but there are some things that you can pick up, right? We got animals, right, that are sad, they're behind bars, we have the sad music, the language used, like words abused, beaten. And if you notice, Sarah McLaughlin right there, she didn't call it a donation. Did you pick up on that? She called it a monthly gift of, I believe, $17 or more, which quite a bit, right? You might have not even picked up the $17 or the way she used the word gift. But all of these elements, they're all pathos. They're all sort of sandwiched together. They're visual, they're auditory, and there are written words. And they're all combining to make you feel sad that you're going to give your money to the BCSPCA to give them your money to help these animals. And one other thing to point out is, again, Sarah McLaughlin, she is a actress, I believe. I'm not entirely sure. I'm a little, this is an older commercial, but I'm also not really big into celebrities, so. But people who do know her, that could also be an appeal to ethos. So, as we can see here, a lot of pathos, but there is a sprinkling of ethos there. So, hopefully this was helpful. These are sort of the things that I want you to look for. Look at the visuals, look at what may be written in these advertisements, listen to what they're saying, how are they trying to target you. We're doing all those things that we just discussed, being skeptical, utilizing that sort of self-defense, as well as picking out the pathos, the ethos, the logos in various forms. So hopefully this was helpful to you guys. Have fun. I tried to pick out some really good advertisements for you guys to sort of parse through, and we will be going more in depth on ethos, pathos, logos, fallacious arguments, and visual arguments in the coming lectures. So, thank you for sticking with me. Hopefully you learned something, and I'll see you guys in class or through the virtual world.